Hey everyone, welcome to the Staff Engineers Path Book Club. Today is April 6th, 2023, and we're discussing chapter 8, which is Good Influence at Scale. And so I'll give a quick overview of what the chapter was about. The author kind of describes influencing others at varying levels. And so there's the individual level, which is one-on-one, the group level, which could be your team or other specific groups that you're part of. Like at GitLab, this could be like a group of maintainers, front-end engineers, or a group of people involved in a specific incident. And then there's the catalyst level, which is like pretty much at the organization or system level. And it involves things like setting up frameworks or cultural structures that let your influence continue even after you're gone. And the author describes various ways to extend your influence at those different levels. And the first way is at advice, which they make sure to point out that make sure that your advice is welcome. Asking for permission is always a good idea. And then in terms of reaching more people, or maybe being a little less personal, writing and speaking in larger venues can help reach larger groups. In addition to advice, there's teaching. So that's things like pairing, shadowing, reviews, coaching, actually teaching specific classes, or even designing classes for others. And one of the unique topics in this chapter, or at least I thought it was a little more unique in the way they named it, was guardrails, which is choosing to let other people get work done autonomously, but then kind of being there to step in and protect them from running into any dangerous mistakes. And the last way described to extend your influence was opportunity, and that's creating opportunity for others through delegation or through direct sponsoring. So with that, I'll let Bree take it away with the first point here.
Sure, thank you. So yeah, the scaling advisor group talked about like giving a talk and writing an article, and I think those are great. I do. I'll start with the second question, which is like, do you all have less boring solutions? I think those are actually really good boring solutions, but this is a space where it's slightly more safe to have a not boring solution. So I'm curious if you have thoughts on less boring solutions that still achieve that.
I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is I'll often link to docs that I might have written. So like if I noticed something at some point, or I notice that I keep repeating something, at some point I'll open an MR and add it to the docs or to the handbook, and then as it continues to come up, I just keep relinking it. And it's surprising how many times it might be something that I added myself, which maybe it's just because I'm so familiar with it. But then the same thing goes with the rest of the docs as well. Just kind of being able to point to things without re-explaining seems like a good boring solution.
It's funny because I was thinking about that too, but I did not think of it as a less boring solution. I thought of it as a more boring solution. Because I was thinking about this in the sense that, like, I think just any writing or talking, like in a recorded form, I guess, or like to a group. I do think like writing and recording talks in any form is a good way to scale, right? So that people, like anyone, can discover the writing or talk in some way. I actually find, just because of the way we work, that writing tends to scale better because videos tend to be difficult to find. I don't know if that's partly just because of the way GitLab works, and I don't know. There may be better systems to integrate searching of certain repositories, videos, and all that other stuff, right? But I think in general, I think either of those would be good boring solutions.
That makes sense. I struggle with whether to add this because I'm like, okay, maybe the boring solution works. That's why we have it. Like, there's not much more to say, and that's okay.
There's another thing that this makes me think of is like, how do we force multiply, right? How do we get our advice out there automatically, or standards, or whatever you want to think about it? Where I sit from a coding standpoint, I've had this thing where I'm like, well, I really think we should write tests in this certain way to make them more readable and things like that. How do I not make that go and automatically get that concept get changed within a month, right? And so when I think of it that way, I think like, how do I publicize this? How do I all those things? And that's the boring solutions you have there. But for me, easier to reach was linting. And so in codes, like that's kind of like automatically putting that advice out there in probably a more strong way. But yeah.
That's you read the, did you read the chapter? Because that's totally one of the things that they talk about.
No.
Okay.
Great minds think alike then, right?
And I think that kind of goes to the part actually about guardrails, right? Because like the point of adding like all the pipeline checks that we have, whether it's for like the code part, even the docs part of GitLab, right? We have code quality for docs in our pipelines. So I think all of these tests and pipeline checks and all of that are a good way to help set up guardrails. And I think there's other ways to do that in some ways. Certainly, I've done, it's kind of maybe somewhere between teaching and guardrail, right? But like kind of being like a shadow on an MR for someone as their support to just like follow along. And like it depending on where they are in their stage of learning, I might not be there to actually coach them. I might just be there to like shadow an MR, follow along and make sure that if I think they're going in the wrong direction, to kind of just nudge them back on course correction.
Something that makes me think about like the guardrail thing, I kept thinking about also roadblocks. And I think a lot of the examples we've come up with are like guardrails truly and not roadblocks, because like a guardrail is genuinely helpful. Like I feel like lose the roadblocks, but add the guardrails. And the jobs and pipelines are like everything. I'm like, okay, yeah, human's gonna look at this, but a robot will look at it first and I can get some feedback. And the autonomy bit of it, I loved. Yeah, that makes sense.
One of the things I was thinking of reading your questions about, the boring solutions and examples, specifically with like writing and posting videos, there's also the ability to have like unintentional influence in those ways. So like one of the ones that I think of is like early on when I was at GitLab, I was playing around with some of the features that were part of my group, and I discovered this weird way, or not weird way, but like this way to use them that I didn't realize I could do. And so didn't seem like doc or handbook worthy. So I just recorded a video and then kind of like shared it with my team and kind of left it at that. But then users started seeing the video and started using the feature in that way. And then it kind of like, I mean, it was getting like over 10,000 views. And so we ended up like saying like, that's the way that we are going to promote using this feature from now on. And it was a very like unintentional kind of road to that path forward on how we use the feature. And it's like, I often think of like, I wonder if that's how we would have wanted it to happen if we had gone back. But it was kind of like at some point there was too much, like there were just like too many people being vocal about like, this is what we want more support and more documentation around it and all of that. So it was, that only happened that one time though, so I don't know how often that happens.
That's a beautiful segue into the other question I had, which is like when you scale your advice up to a group, if I'm talking to someone one-on-one and they don't get it, I can kind of catch that. If I've written something and I put it out into the universe, maybe you knew what I meant because you're used to like the way I speak and phrase things, but maybe you don't, you completely misunderstand me and you're, 6 months down the road, it's like, oh, that's actually not what I meant. So I feel like I didn't notice much in the book on taking care with your meaning when you're scaling. Maybe it was there, maybe it's obvious.
I don't know that it's obvious. I would say that's like personally why I prefer writing something, because it's much easier to change it. So if I write anything, handbook, docs, blog posts, who knows, whatever, right? Thankfully with with GitLab resources, whether again it's docs or handbook or whatever, other people can also change it, right? It's not just me. But even on a personal blog post, if someone points it out, then I can go and easily update it. Whereas video, I think it's obviously more difficult to update, and but it is obviously possible. I think we can give ourselves a certain amount of grace that, like, within context, I think a lot of people will understand that, like what Steve did, where he just recorded a video for the team, right? I think it's usually fairly obvious from context and the way that it's presented that there's a certain amount of like, okay, I just did this for the team, kind of thing, right? And but it's definitely interesting. I've had people message me about things that I've just edited like as soon as they let me know. So yeah, I haven't thought about it too much, to be honest. I'd be interested what Steve and Doug might have to say, but it's definitely one of those things where I was just like, well, yeah, that's why I prefer writing.
I've never really thought of that, but that's a good point. I don't know how you would combat it other than getting feedback and doing what Artie was saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the importance of paying attention to the channel that you like put things in, like like where are you like posting this like article or talk or whatever. And I think like GitLab Unfiltered is a very anything can be there, so it shouldn't be expected that something there is going to become like a procedure or a specific way of doing something. But yeah, like maybe just paying more attention to where you're putting out information when you put it out there.
Maybe the thing that's important here also is like figuring out how you get that feedback. If nobody comes and tells you, how might you encourage that feedback to find out it was misunderstood? I think that more resonates with me about when I put something out there and I think it's understood, and then I have maybe a pairing session with a group, we talk about it, and I realize I didn't explain that very well at all, and finding ways to do that and being proactive about that may be a good thing to do as well.
Hearing like know your audience, just like very standard like writing advice, but just like a different application of it.
Yeah, I think it's harder here. I know when I started at GitLab, I was immediately cognizant of I would be talking to non-native English speakers a lot more and not talking synchronously like this. So I try to make a conscious effort to speak in more, to reduce my use of slang, those types of things, to speak in more basic English, I guess. Basic is the wrong word, but simpler English, and not try to put nuance in it and things like that, because English is really hard, let alone for native speakers asynchronously, but I can only imagine what it would be for non-native.
I think about that a lot too, Doug, like writing to people in tickets. And when you look with that eye and a lot of the idioms we use, it's like, yeah, what does that, how would someone know what that means? And I use it as like plain English. I know what you're saying. I sort of think of it as like plain English. And it's probably like an actual term for it. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I mean, we do. I find myself thinking of things all the time like that. Like, it's natural for me to say, oh, I'll take a stab at that, right? But that's violent, but but it's just an example of like, that's a slang term, right? Like, and you wouldn't realize that unless you're like really trying to think about it. Like, let alone it being violent, it's like hard to understand what it means. Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, I often make a joke that like most of the like where English is their second language, most of the people on the teams I've been on, I always joke that they're much better at English than I am. I did have one point that I had noted, um, and it's kind of like this realization about the catalyst level influence. And so I think like at GitLab in the career matrix, like we talk a lot about expanding your scope to larger groups, which is kind of that same idea of like individual level, group level, catalyst level. And so I've often kind of like thought about it of like, how do you actually do that? Like I'll have an idea of like, this would be great company wide, but then like how do you actually go about doing that? For example, I think one of the examples in the book is like, don't just be a mentor, you could create an entire mentorship program. And I think one of the things I realized was that like influencing at that level kind of requires a lot of the skills that were covered earlier in this book, like being able to lead big projects and having the different maps to navigate your organization. And so I think like I'd always kind of thought of some of those skills as being separate. Like you're good at leading, you're good at influencing, you're good at like doing big projects. But I'm realizing now that there's a ton of overlap in how all of that can fit together.
As part of that, I'm curious whether either you've seen or done like aside from like the example in the book, like if you've seen or done anything at GitLab that you think is kind of at the catalyst level of things. I'm curious, like specifically kind of in engineering, if there are specific examples you can think of.
I mean, the ones that come to mind were things that kind of already existed when I started, but I think like at some point, like a lot of the values were built in and kind of became a part of everyday engineering, like the iteration and breaking down MRs and things like that. Like at some point, someone must have been like, you know, we need to start doing this. So it's, I guess it's before my time, but like those are some of the examples I think of. Trying to think of something more recent that might come to mind.
So you know what's really coming to mind for me? It's, I don't know if this is like the best example of it, but the request for help issues that we're rolling out across different stages, like that is something that reaches a whole bunch of different groups within GitLab. It's how GitLab support gets help from different groups. Like that's a thing that we easily could have said, okay, just support and auth, they're going to do this thing, but it's support and like everybody. And I think that took a lot of, it's iterative and we're doing it like in groups, but that takes a lot of talking to people across the company to like get that done. I don't know, Doug and Steve, how much you see those, but like to me, that's a thing that stands out in this category.
I'm Googling what you just said, or I'm not Googling, I'm going to Google it to our docs or whatever to see, like, because I haven't heard of it, or I haven't remembered it.
I hate to say it, I haven't actually used it because I always just go to filing a bug issue where I'm just like, here's a bug issue, here's everything that we've done. Can you like help take a look at this?
Gotcha. I can briefly summarize what it is.
We
And
must
okay,
have a
so
handbook page.
do we? I'm looking for one.
Feels like we must.
We should. I know there's a support team meta.
Doesn't exist if it's not in the handbook.
Well, we get an MR out of this, so that's good.
Is it this one? I don't know if that's it or not.
Yeah, that looks like it. Possibly.
Yes, that would be it.
I find them useful in some situations where, like, to your point, Cynthia, if the right thing is create an issue. But like, if it's like, I don't know if this is one issue, misconfig, 18 issues all bundled into one that we need to like figure out. And it also, if there's a lot of like stuff that's specific to the customer's setup, that's highly relevant because we can't reproduce it, then I'll do this because then I can add other information that wouldn't go like in the issue, you know. But it was a detail.
So like each section will have like a project or something like that, and you put issues in there, and that's how you get help without actually making them an issue in GitLab, which it may not actually become, right?
Exactly.
On that page, is there a listing of the different projects, like dev section? Okay.
Yeah, it's that third column in the table.
And you say people actually triage these issues, and you have seen good progress on it.
It's amazing. I'm working with someone from package registry right now on it. It's only ever been a good thing.
I see the dev section one, but then you still have to figure out which group, right?
That sounds right. Yeah. And not everyone has them yet. Like it's a in progress thing, I believe.
Yeah, certainly not all the sections are in there. I think for support, it's just been a really good way to encourage and make sure that like we capture things in an issue, regardless of where that really is. Like this kind of helps push support to put it in a specific place so that like we're not always like asking the question of like, oh, where do we put this? And it's a place where we can put issues in order to kind of just even discuss, like Bree says, just to even discuss when it's like it's not clearly a bug, or like we need to request help and we just need a form, like some way to kind of discuss it without it being all in Slack, because as we all know, it's difficult to troubleshoot in Slack.
Yeah, and I can speak from like the stage group standpoint. Like I like how it pulls the question out of Slack, so it makes it a little bit more async and documented. Because a lot of times when someone asks something in Slack, it's like really hard to know like how urgent it is or how high of a priority it is. Like it makes you want to answer right away, but like moving it to another platform like can help create more like guidance around that, I guess, which is nice.
We're technically over time. So
I didn't even notice. Yeah, you're right.
thanks
Cool.
for the
Well,
great discussion. I'm gonna head on.
yeah, thanks everyone for joining. And yeah, next week is the last chapter. So hope to see you all there.
Thank you.
Bye.